Good to have you with us, Curtis Ellis. He's in Washington, D.C. He's gone the other way. He's gone south. We're going to have him on momentarily. The president today addressing the Security Council of the United Nations. This is going to be a lot of fun. He's chairing the meeting of the Security Council. Normally, everybody on the Security Council votes against the United States, so the president going to give them perhaps a little encouragement to maybe look our way once in a while. So far, his trip to the UN has been stellar, leading off with another great success on trade. I love this president. I have been railing against this ridiculous Korean trade deal, KORUS, K-O-R-U-S. First of all, anything with an acronym that big has to be bad. NAFTA, KORUS, they're all bad. As soon as you get a big acronym, it's to fool you, right? That's what they do. They give you this big KORUS, right? K-O-R-U-S, the Korean Free Trade Agreement. Now, even when you think of KORUS, you think, what is that? How could that harm you, right? It's good for you. KORUS is good for you. Take it. It's good. It's horrible. Joining us now to break this all down, he's a senior policy advisor with America First Policies. He was on the Trump transition team. He was on the Trump campaign team. He was also chairman of the American Jobs Alliance. And he was with the Department of Labor, but now he's a senior policy advisor with America First Policies, and he's my comrade in arms, as they say. Curtis Ellis, great to have you, sir.
Hey, it's great to be here, John. Welcome to New York. Too bad I'm in Washington, but still welcome to New York.
It's good to be in New York. I'll be here all week. For decades, politicians have talked about fixing broken trade deals, and they do nothing. Zilch. Now, in New York, for the 73rd session of the United Nations General Assembly this week, President Trump met yesterday with South Korean President Moon Jae to sign a new trade agreement that protects, finally, American workers and businesses. The revised deal will increase U.S. exports while preserving jobs in the American auto industry. Now, just for a little background, KORUS, which I hate, signed in 2012. Our trade deficit with Korea skyrocketed from $6.3 billion to $9.8 billion, a 50% increase by 2017. Yet under the new agreement, South Korea will double the annual number of American automobiles that can enter its market. And the Republic of Korea saying that they're going to take those tariffs off. What do you make of this, Curtis Ellis?
It's a great deal. It's exactly what he promised he would do on the campaign trail. I was there with Peter Navarro and Wilbur Ross and the entire trade team. We were writing the policy with President Trump, with then candidate Donald J. Trump. He insisted that we had to redo the South Korea deal. Fixing NAFTA wasn't enough. Getting out of TPP wasn't enough. Look, what's happened here with Korea is we're getting rid of, this deal gets rid of the other tricks that Korea used to keep American products out. As you said, doubled the number of cars that can enter Korea. But in addition to the numerical limits, Korea had these various rules in place that would keep American cars and American products out. They had customs clearance forms. They had procedures that the American cars had to meet Korean emission standards and Korean safety standards. Now, if you know what a Korean safety standard is, well, good luck, because I don't. And as the cars roll off the assembly line in Detroit or wherever they're made, unfortunately, some of them aren't made in Detroit anymore, but that's another story. They meet American safety standards. They'll have something in Korea where the steering wheel has to be a 1 inch further away, 1 inch shorter, or the headlight has to be inclined at a slightly different angle. That means retooling the entire assembly line, right? I mean, this is ridiculous. Not going to happen. But that's how they managed to keep American cars out of Korea. And by the way, other countries do the same thing. European Union does the same thing. The China, Japan, They have very strict safety standards designed to protect the domestic market. And these are called non-tariff barriers. Same thing applied to food. They had different standards for safety standards for what they would call organic food or what they would call non-organic food. And if we're allowed in America to have 17 parts per billion of some type of insecticide residue on an apple, over there they would say, well, you have to have 1 part per billion. I don't want to get too much in the weeds here, but this is now that pretty much around the world, actual tariffs have been eliminated, except for the cases where you see subsidies and blatant violations. But in general trade, the taxes they put on imports, any country, have been pretty much reduced to near zero. So what countries do is they adopt these other means to protect their own industries and protect their markets, keep imports out. The new Korea-U.S. trade deal has Korea eliminating these so-called non-tariff barriers. And that's an important step. It now sets a standard and shows the way forward for negotiations with other countries.
So this renegotiation, if you will, how did the president do this? Because, as you said, you guys had kind of written this for him during the campaign trail. It was signed in 2012 by President Obama. The trade deficit went up 50%. If there was a carrot and a stick here for the Koreans to change this, what was it, Curtis Ellis?
Well, President Trump made it clear that we're not going to be suckers anymore. We're over there. We have thousands of troops in Korea. We protect Korea from North Korea's designs to take over the country. We're doing all, and the other carrot that Korea has is they want to sell their Kias in the United States. They want to sell their cars and their products in the United States. They want access to the U.S. consumer market. We used to give that away for free. That was American policy for 70 years after World War II. We're going to give all these countries access to the American market, let them sell their products here in the U.S. so they can build up their societies, become middle class, and then they'll be our great friend, and we'll have allies, and we'll be able to have military bases in their country. And who cares if they won't let us sell our products in their country? And hey, look, when we first started doing that 70 years ago, those people didn't have any money. They couldn't buy any American products anyway, so I guess it was a good idea. But guess what? Things have changed. So President Trump is the first president in 70 years to recognize the world has changed since 1945. Imagine that.
I really never thought I would see the day when, in a matter of months, we've renegotiated NAFTA with Mexico. Canada really now has no choice. They're going to have to renegotiate it or do whatever they're doing, but we're not involved in it. We renegotiated this Korea Free Trade Agreement, which was not to our benefit. Look, when you do a free trade agreement, when you do an agreement with somebody and your trade deficit goes up 50% in a 6-year period, what the hell kind of deal is that?
A bad one.
Come on. I remember when
every trade deal we've made, that's happened. Every time we make a trade deal, I'm sure that you can find a couple of exceptions. But NAFTA, our trade deficit went up. They said it would go down. Korea, trade deficit went up. They said it would go down. China, they said, we're going to have 1.5 billion new customers. It's going to be wonderful. American companies are going to be able to sell their product to 1 billion new consumers. Our trade deficit went through the roof. It did not go down.
Right.
They promise us the moon. They give us a piece of moldy cheese.
That's about it. So, Curtis, let's go to the other portions here of the president's meeting at the UN. I was excited to have you on today because we always talk about trade, but you personally covered the UN for a very long time. You had your office there at the United Nations. What do you think the president's main objective is today when he chairs the Security Council meeting?
Well, one of the main themes that he's going to hit again, and he did in his past appearance here, is talking about sovereignty, American sovereignty and national sovereignty. The United Nations was established as a forum for countries to talk to each other and to resolve conflicts without going to war. Right? Here's a place where we can sit down and talk and figure it out. There's also a couple of other things baked into the cake, or a couple of other assumptions built in to the founding of the United Nations. And some of them were stated explicitly, and some of them weren't, because you get these shifty politicians, they try to sneak stuff in without telling you. I know that's hard to believe that a politician would do that, or the government would do that, but that happened at the United Nations as well. Look, the world was a smoking ruin after World War II. Europe had been ravaged by 2 wars in really less than 30 years. It left an entire generation dead in the mud, in the trenches of World War I, and then in the gas chambers and on the battlefields of World War II. Japan was a radioactive ruin. And they said, well, we can't have this happen again. What caused it? What was the source of all of this? And they identified, or I would say misidentified, one of the problems as being nationalism. They said, look, Europe, you had in close proximity to each other the French, the British, and the Germans. Mm-hmm. And throughout history, the French and the British, for centuries, had been rivals. They had different languages, different cultures, and they were very proud of their culture and their different cultures and their different languages. Then along come the Germans. It wasn't really a unified country until 1850s or so. But you had this really demented form of National Socialism, right? The Nazis, National Socialism. You had Hitler. I don't need to recount that history. But it was so odious and disgusting. They said, we can't let something like this arise. What did it arise from? Now, National Socialism, right? That's what Nazis were, National Socialism. Instead of saying the problem was socialism, they decided the problem was nationalism. So the wise men who created the UN. So what we're going to do is we're going to create an institution that is going to weaken nationalism and weaken national identity and weaken nations in themselves. And we'll start by letting the nations talk to each other at the UN, but our goal here is to have a transnational, or international, if you will, but really transnational, because it would eliminate nations in themselves, and we would have this world authority. We would have these global authorities, these transnational authorities housed within the UN that will make the crucial decisions and determine the shape of societies and budgets and trade and development and all these other policies over time. It won't happen in the national legislatures and in the national capitals. It'll happen in the conference rooms and the back rooms of Geneva and Turtle Bay, New York. So that's really the project that's been at hand now for 70 years. You see it in Europe, the European Union, and the European Union took decision-making powers away from the national capitals of Rome, Paris, London, Berlin, etc., and moved it to Brussels, to the Eurocrats. You see it in the United Nations now, to a lesser degree, but that's the project. They're going to tell everybody what's the best policy on immigration, what's the best policy on trade development, what's the best policy on sustainable development, and this and that. President Trump is going to come there and say, thanks, guys, but we're going to take care of our own future here. We'll be happy to talk to you as a sovereign nation. Sovereign nations are going to be the model for world development and for world peace, not a bunch of international technocrats and bureaucrats in the UN. We've got to recalibrate this, folks. I mean, you look at what the UN came up with in Israel, in the Middle East, right? They decided to, back in 1947, actually, they decided to divide the what was it at the time it was called mandatory Palestine, the British mandate. Palestine was a British colony, essentially. We're going to divide it in two between the Arabs and the Jews, and then we're going to take Jerusalem, and it's going to be administered as an international city. Now, somebody dreamed this up. I just use this as an example. How are you going to administer an international city? Who's going to administer it? It's going to be the United Nations. They had such great faith in the ability of international authority that it was going to run a city in the most volatile region in the world that's claimed by 3 different religions as its holy place. I mean, we saw how that worked out. So
not very well.
Whole idea of it didn't. So, the whole idea of the great faith that the world had in the ability of international authorities to manage the world, the great faith that they had in that in 1947 has since proven to be a delusion. And President Trump is really going to, not in so many words, say that.
Well, and he's got sympathizers, right? Across Europe now, there's a rejection of the European Union. And even though not every country wants to get out of it, you've got Italy, for instance, they're not talking about exiting the European Union, but they want their sovereignty back. So we've got these various movements across Europe which are recoiling to the European Union. And remember, when the European Union was set up, because like the United Nations, as you just explained, how it evolved from let's meet to stop wars and get people talking. Remember, when the European Union was set up and that was presented to us, it was for economic progress, right?
Right.
A common currency, common trade, being able to move workers, right, in between countries, migrants. It was all about benefiting the economies of every country. A rising tide together would lift all boats. That was the purpose of it. And what it's devolved into is bureaucrats in Brussels deciding on issues of sovereignty, not in the best interest of any individual country at any time, but they're taking on all of the power. And so people like Brexit in England, they're just rejecting that, and they want their country back. They want their nationality back. I think we had President Macron, right, going to Holland. Was it, Curtis, correct me here, a couple weeks ago? And he said there are no more French and there are no more Hollanders. There's just Scandinavians and Europeans and people. Basically saying there's no nations. And that speech he made got roundly criticized in Scandinavia, because even with all of the immigration going on in the Scandinavian countries, now there's a backlash to that as well. People want their own nationality and sovereignty, and that's not a bad thing.
It's not a bad thing. See, that was the misidentification by the elites, by the elite Europeans, the elite Americans who don't consider themselves Americans, the elite Europeans, whatever they consider themselves, that having this cultural identity is somehow going to lead to the gas chamber inevitably. No, people, look, the French like their wine, they like their cheeses, they like their berets, they like their accordion music, whatever the heck they like. There's nothing wrong with that. The British, they like their bad food, their mushy peas. They, look, come on, they're proud of this, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's perfectly natural. People are connected to the culture and the land that they have, that their parents and grandparents and generations before them were connected to, and that is something you're never going to get rid of. And to try to get rid of it, what do you replace it with? What do you replace it with? No one's answered that question. The the European Union was started to facilitate the free movement of goods, right? It started as the coal and steel community, right? It was a way to integrate the production of coal and steel throughout Western Europe. And it started with like 3 countries. And it's taken on a life of its own, a project of its own. And and then when you started bringing in the free movement of people, that's where things started to become a little dicey, because people are not commodities. Human beings are not commodities. They want to be with their families. They want to be with the people they're familiar with who speak the same language. There's nothing wrong with that. That does not make you a xenophobe or a racist. It makes you a human being. So that's where the bureaucrats and the academic, intellectual, economic fundamentalist libertarians, that's where they've missed the boat. People are not robots and machines. Famous quote from the Germans after World War II, they brought in a bunch of Turks from Turkey because they needed workers, because everybody died on the battlefield, right? They said, we wanted workers, but we got people. The Turks they didn't become Germans. They stayed in their little enclaves, and we wanted workers because the Germans thinking, like machines, commodity, labor commodity. We wanted workers, but we got people. And they've had problems ever since. I don't mean the Turks are problems. I mean, so far as cultural assimilation didn't happen.
Well, that basically has been what we've been saying for some time. People are not commodities, and the Turks went there and stayed there, and it is what it is. But meantime, the president fulfilling another promise, the Korean Free Trade Agreement kaput, and we've got a new one in place, and it's much better than it was. Again, whenever we make one of these trade agreements, our deficit doubles or triples, you got to wonder what the purpose of it is. And the president fixing this, another promise made and promise kept.